Welcome everyone to DRJ's webinar series. I'm Bob Arnold, President here at DRJ. We thank you for joining us today and we hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. Everyone's phone has been muted and we ask you to utilize the question panel you'll find on the right hand side of your screen. Our speaker today will attempt to answer as many of these questions as possible at the end of the session. Today's sponsor is Strategic BCP and the topic today is BC metrics that count. Collect, report, and present the value behind your BC program. Our presenter is Frank Perlmutter. Frank has played a dynamic role in business continuity for over 20 years. As founder of Strategic BCP, he is the architect of Resilience One business continuity planning and risk management software, a leader in Gartner's Magic Quadrant for business continuity management planning software every year. And with no further introductions, I'd like to welcome and turn the mic over to Frank.
All right, thanks so much, Bob. So I'm excited to present on the topic today. We're going to be talking about metrics. So what is a metric? How do you gather the metrics? How do you present your metrics? What are some of the tools that you can use for all of your analysis, for your data gathering, all of those different items? So it is really at the core of what the business continuity professional does. So you can see in our agenda today that we're going to go over the 101s of what metrics are, which metrics to gather. So there's a ton of them. So what are the ones that are going to be the most salient to present to your stakeholders? We're going to go through the step-by-step process for delivering those metrics. And then we're going to wrap up with a case study. So delivering metrics from start to finish. And this is from a number of our different clients. So we're going to be covering lots of different industries on there. So I think hopefully we'll cover the industry that you're in too. Okay, so one thing just from a logistical standpoint is that there's a bit of a delay in between the advancing of the slides that we noticed. So I just advanced that slide about 5 seconds ago, so we're on about a 5-second delay on here in between advancing the slides. So I'll try to be cognizant of that as we move forward. So let's start with Business Continuity Metrics 101. So let's wait for that for the next slide to come up here. Okay, there we go. So what are business continuity metrics? So first, what's a metric? So we're looking at standards of measurement. So we're looking at measuring things like efficiency or progress, the quality of a plan, a process, or a product. When we look at business continuity metrics, there's lots of different things around, especially around that efficiency. How well are we recovering? Progress, when we look around our program, what kind of progress are we making on our planning tasks? Quality of the plan. When we're doing our deliverables, how good is it? How well does that help us to recover? So metrics definitions are applied to the plan, the process, or the product being measured. So that's the overall definition. When we get into business continuity, what exactly are those type of metrics that we can measure? So let's go over a couple of these. Okay. So I've broken these down, and there's definitely quite a few more than this, but these are some of the real core ones that we look at. What can you measure? So I've broken those down into operational metrics, BC program metrics, so that's like your planning progress, like I just mentioned, and then your resiliency metrics. How well can we recover? How well can our vendors recover? Those different types of resiliency metrics. So let's go over a couple of these. Operational metrics, hazards to the organization. So this is your typical risk assessment. We look at things like those weather-related incidents, those technology incidents that can happen, the cyber security incidents. What are those different hazards to the organization? How can they affect us? What's the probability impact, the risk of those occurring? How good are our mitigation measures? We may look at those in our resiliency metrics. Operational vulnerabilities. Operational vulnerabilities are around business process. So when we look at how we're performing a particular business function or a process, what are the different vulnerabilities that happen as we complete each of those different steps in those process? Downtime impact is a really popular one, typically measured by our recovery timeframe objectives. So that's our business impact analysis. So we won't go into too much detail on that. And we look at things as a result of that BIA, or as a result of a value analysis that we're doing, where we're identifying what are our critical business processes, or what value do they bring to our organization. We look at our critical support resources. What are our most important applications, our most important data, our most important people? And then obviously, really big right now is our critical vendors. So especially in banking, we look at any sort of supply chain standards. Our critical vendors are essential to our operations. So what are they? And then we can also look too, if we go down into these resiliency metrics, we can also look at what's their readiness. So if we do have an outage, how are they going to help us, and are they actually prepared to do so? We look at another one, BC program metrics, planning progress. That's a pretty easy one, but there's different ways that we can measure that. Planning progress can be looked at overall progress of a task that we're doing as part of our program, like completing that risk assessment or business impact analysis. We can also look at how much of our plan, so the overall document that we've completed. We can look at an efficiency in completing those planning tasks. So that's really important. There's a lot of stakeholders. We're going out into our different business units. We're going into IT. A lot of times we're going to the C-level to go ask them to help us out. How quickly are we completing those tasks, and how thoroughly are we completing them too? In other words, is the data that's coming out of that relevant? Is it really good? And as I just said, relevant to our executives too. We can look at compliance with regulations and conformance to standards. So when we look at our regulations, sometimes, if we're in banking or we're in healthcare, utilities, or even telecommunications, we're looking at how well we're complying against that set of standards. So if we take everything from like the FFIC BCP work program for financial services, or a more general standard like ISO 22301, if we say these are the things we need to do to comply or to conform with that, how closely are we getting to that? That's really important, especially for regulated organizations. We can also look at resiliency metrics. So limitation of impact. So that's the big one. That's why we do our jobs. So how effective, how efficient are our hazard mitigation measures? Are we really mitigating our impact overall to the enterprise by, say, like, in our information technology, by having our service up 24/7? How quickly can we respond to a cyber incident? And how much impact are we actually mitigating? So are we mitigating revenue impact? Are we mitigating that reputation impact? So those exercises are really important to measure when we're doing this. So testing and exercising, there's a whole bunch of, I know we've, especially recently, there's been a whole bunch of webinars on that. So how effective are we in actually mitigating that impact? Time to recover. So are our plans actually facilitating that recovery? So sometimes people are saying, we'll even watch and they'll say, oh, I'm just going to put my plan down. So how many people are actually using their plans during that disaster? The time to recover, how quickly can people execute on each of those different steps? And as I mentioned before, our third parties, how are they helping us with our recovery? But they're also providing value within that supply chain too. So what type of value are they providing in there too? And notice what I'm saying. So I'm saying there's two sides to some of these metrics. There's the impact side, so it's the negative side. But you could say loss of revenue, but you can also say too, this particular process brings this revenue, delivers this revenue to our organization. And it's kind of an interesting way to really provide value to our executives. I think sometimes business continuity professionals are accused of being negative all the time. We talked about impact, we talk about disasters, but really a lot of what we're doing is we're measuring the value that each of the different business processes and each of the different components in our organization are bringing to it. We're showing how value is delivered, and what could be more important than that to our executives and our C-levels. In the next slide, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go over a bit about how we map each of these different metric types to our business continuity practice areas. So these are the tasks that we're doing each and every day. So when we look at operational metrics, most of those are found within our risk assessment and especially within our business impact analysis. But it's a business impact analysis that's capturing the steps within a business process. Really important. A lot of folks are not doing that, where they're not actually looking at how that process is delivered. But we need to understand how the process is being performed so that we can understand the metrics around that. You can't have one without the other. So that's really important. So a specific type of BIA. When we look at BC program metrics, that's our project management and our audit functions on there. How well are we actually managing that program? So there's a big amount of content if we ever want to reference that in like an ISO 22301. So that's real good. And then it's companion standard 313. The resiliency metrics that we're looking at, as I mentioned previously, are in exercises and tests. So we're going and we're actually seeing, okay, how quickly can we recover that IT application? How well can we operate in that workaround mode or critical business processes? How quickly are we evacuating people from our facility? So we're looking at essentially the effectiveness within our different areas, our crisis management, our IT disaster recovery, and our business recovery. And then lastly, there's our vendor risk management. Looking at our vendors, assessing how good are their recovery procedures, and typically we're doing that via their plans. So we're looking at that, and some people that are a little more sophisticated are also interviewing those vendors too, and adding that as a part of the assessment on whether they're prepared to help us during that recovery. Okay, so now that we understand the different types of metrics and where we're gathering them, what we're going to do is we're going to go on to our next slide. We're going to go into the step-by-step metrics delivery process. I'm going to wait for it to go on to the next screen here. It looks like a couple more seconds here. Okay, there we go. Okay. So the first thing that we do when we're gathering metrics is we want to answer a couple of essential questions. So I put 7 up here that I typically ask before I'm gathering my metrics. Question 1. Here's the most important thing. What data has the most value for your decision makers, for your stakeholders? I want to know, because that's my audience, I want to know what's most important to them. Do they care about the progress of my plan? A lot of times, maybe not so much. Do they care about operations and what's bringing value to the organization? Those are usually the hot topics right there. Those are what they want to see. So once I've answered those questions, we'll actually go over a couple of specific specific questions around the particular metrics too a little later. Once we've defined what those are, we say from whom or from where can we obtain that data? And I say whom or where because you can ask people or you can get it from data that's stored, the secondary data. You know, the data might be in an annual report or it might be in internal reporting that you have. So where can we get that? So if you need to ask questions from people, what are those questions? And how do you structure them in a clear and non-leading way? So a lot of times, you know, it's interesting. When you're administering a survey, you can ask a leading question. So you're pointing them in a particular direction. So there's definitely an art to that, going in and saying, so what do you think this is? And it's like, well, you know, so-and-so said that, you know, this process was critical or that we lose, you know, it's this opinion-based kind of thing. We don't want to do it that way. We want to find it in a way where the questions are clear. There's no bias that's being introduced into them. And there's a lot of good tips out on the internet if you want to look at market research and how that's done. I actually used to be one of those survey takers before I was with Strategic BCP. Well, actually a long time before I was with Strategic BCP. I was one of the survey takers in the mall, and we always had to, one of those horribly annoying people. So we had to figure out what questions we needed to ask. We needed to ask them in a clear and non-leading way. And we had to be, and I say least invasive. We had to do it quickly. We had to keep their attention. We had to do it in a way where we could gather that information quickly, but where we were getting good data too. So there's, like I said, there's a lot of tips out on the internet with market research on how to do that. What analysis is required to provide meaningful results? So once we get that data, how do we analyze it? And how are we going to present that? So these are obviously questions you want to answer beforehand. If you don't have the tools to answer to analyze that data, you're going to be, and summarize it, that's going to be highly problematic. And you want to see and even ask how your decision makers like your data presented. That's really, really important. Some of them may like it to be very brief, where you're presenting maybe a couple of visuals and then some of the charts behind it. Some may like big reports. Some may like a single page. It all depends, but it's really matching that presentation method with what those folks want. And sometimes you might have multiple audiences, so you might have to prepare a couple of different presentation packets when you're getting ready to present your results. So that's just a couple of tips on that. Okay, so when we go on to the next area of our plan, what are the metrics that have the most value for our decision makers? So here's a bunch of questions that I put by metrics type. So operational metrics, you can see here, what are my company's major operational inefficiencies or vulnerabilities? So when I'm looking at business process, I can map that, and I can look at single points of failure. I can look at where there's excessive manual handoffs in there. That's all around that BIA and the mapping of business process. Vulnerabilities easily captured within our risk assessment. Where are those? What are my most critical operational activities? Okay, the prioritization of business activities, and that could be done in a number of different ways. Typically, as business continuity professionals, we'll do that by recovery timeframe objective, maximum tolerable downtime. But one of the problems with that is that we may only have a certain number of buckets of each of those. So in other words, like I might have 10 available RTOs that I could select. So everything gets a rating from 1 to 10. We might want to get more micro on that. I'm going to show you how to do that today. We can look and we can see what are our most important IT applications, our infrastructure, our data, our vendors, so the people internal and external that are most critical to our operations. What are the highest risk hazards? When we're prioritizing the supporting items, and we call those support components, resources, interdependencies, dependencies, basically the different items that are supporting the business operations, we look to assess at how important they are to operating our organization. So in other words, if I look at an IT application, I would say it helps support these 15 business functions. And here's how important each of these business functions are. We can score these different items like that by how important they are to the operation of the organization, by how often they're used, and by how important it is to each of those different business functions. Within the BC program, we can look at a couple of different things. There's a whole bunch of things around this. And this is just like a normal project in a lot of ways. What's the project in completing our BCM task? So, and how long does it take to write a plan? So it's kind of interesting. A lot of folks will actually just generate a metric around, well, how long does it take to write an overall plan? That's a bit macro. You're looking at it overall and not by task. If you look at it by task, you can see places where you might be getting caught up, where you might be you might be spending a little bit too much time with the people that you're interviewing. So if you break it down by, okay, I just gathered, what are the business functions? How long did it take to do, say, my impact assessment? How long did it take me to do my recovery strategies? How long did it take me to assemble those vendors? We can find ways that might be inefficient and ultimately make them better. We can make them more efficient. We can do them in less time. And then the last part of it, which is really important, is how well does our BC program comply or conform to standards, auditors' criteria, and one other thing too I don't have on here, customers' criteria. There's a standard that we need to pass, and that standard can come from a regulatory organization or agency. It can come from just a general standard like one of the ISO standards. It can come from our executives, customers, lots of different constituencies. And we want to see and match how well is what I'm doing with my program match up and meet or even exceed those standards. Resiliency. how long does it take each of our teams to recover? So you can look at metrics and you can measure it by team is an interesting way to do it. So how efficient are they in actually executing our procedures? You can look at it by plan. You can look at it by asset. So overall, so like say like recovering an application might be multiple teams, typically is, to recover those particular applications. How well does my infrastructure team do and my network team do and that app team do? So we can look at it like that. So different ways to measure that. And how effective are our mitigation strategies in limiting impact? So one of the things that a lot of folks will do, and we see this a little bit less than we would probably like, is that when you're submitting a budget request, you're actually effectively answering this question. So if I'm, for ITDR, if I'm buying a mitigation strategy and I say, okay, to implement this, it's going to be $1.5 million, I'm mitigating how much an impact from revenue, productivity, reputational, maybe liquidity, other financial measures. You want to see what exactly is that mitigating. So hopefully you've done that beforehand. And typically the way that we can measure that and really test for that is we can stage it within an exercise. So there's multiple different ways to really to execute on that and model that. On the next slide, we're going to go over where we can obtain that data. So this is pretty typical for pretty much any type of research. So you have your primary methods and you have your secondary methods. So the primary methods are asking people or getting that data from people. So the direct ask is obviously the optimal way to do that. You're sitting there, you could administer the questions, hopefully there's nothing that's sometimes with surveys, you can have those leading questions in there, or they may not understand them. I certainly saw a lot of those when I was doing surveys where people were like, what exactly does that mean? Well, you can't explain it to them if you're just handing them a survey. So that's not an optimal way, but obviously it is an available way. And then observing people too. And this is kind of an interesting one to do. And I found this to be particularly effective too. A lot of times you can go out into the field and you can look and you can see how those business processes are operating. I used to like to say, if I go out and say I'm in a healthcare company and people are processing claims or they're taking customer support phone calls, I'd watch them and I'd see how they perform that process. You could look and you can even see, when you're taking customer service calls, you can even see on the terminals how many people are waiting in a queue, how many have they processed for that day, so that some of the metrics are right up on these tote boards where you can actually see how people are doing. So it was a great way to be able to take a look and you could even spot, we'd even see people filing things, where they would go, all right, well, I processed the claim. Now I'm going to put it in a folder. I'm going to stick it up on a shelf. And even today, we still see things like that. So you can spot inefficiencies right then and there. And it's a great way from looking at that and saying, hey, look, I dug deep into that process to see what was going on, because that's the process that you're recovering. You're going in and it's critical to be able to understand what's going on to be able to write up those recovery plans too. So there's a lot of really good metrics you can get out of it and a lot of good things, supplemental things that also help with your other business continuity planning tasks. And then you have your secondary methods. So, a lot of people are always saying, and this is fact, is that, every business continuity planner, they expect me to go meet with the CEO. Well, that's never going to happen. Or maybe I get 5 minutes if I'm lucky. And that's right. You're probably not going to meet with the board. You might not meet with some of those C-level people. But there's those internal data sources that are available. Some of those, there's always the financials. A lot of times you can get the efficiency of process within those particular areas. A lot of times those are available in there. The hazard data externally too, and even internally, where people are capturing what's happened from that incident standpoint. If we were a public company, I always look to that annual report. The intranet has always got a ton of different things on that. I always look for org lists, in the org charts where I can find people, and I go to them in some of those critical areas and I say, would you mind sitting with me and just telling me what you do? Like, what's the purpose of what's going on in your area? What do you think the problems are in your area? right now? How can I help? Because I'm looking and I'm seeing how to recover this, but there may be things that are causing incidents within your particular areas. What's the value that you bring to the organization? So it's all these different items that you can gather, and people are usually really nice about talking to you. You know, it's like, gosh, I wish somebody would have asked me before. We hear that all the time. Okay, so a little more on gathering primary data too. So as I said before, the best process is to gather primary data. Creating rapport is essential to the success of your program. You know, you're working with all of these people to essentially recover an organization. You know, you want them essentially to like you. You know, it makes it a lot easier to do your job and to gather your data. As I mentioned before, indirect survey responses can frequently be confusing, so the data may not be have a lot of integrity to it because it's open to interpretation. And then if you do go through secondary data, you should validate that through a primary source. I've seen sometimes like, oh, that was an outdated report. It's like, okay, I have the right one here, don't I? So always check. When you're sitting with people, keeping people engaged is important. The length of the data gathering process is really important. Stop before people tune you out. It's really important. We've seen business continuity meetings have been known for putting way too many people in the room. So, you know, you'll see 20 people in a room, too many people. They all have different data that they're giving you. A lot of times you won't be engaging them during the entire time period in there. And then also making sure they understand what exactly it is that they're, why they're providing that data to you. What's the output and how does it help them? That's usually a really good way to keep their attention. And then also too, before, you're administering this, stop data gathering before you burn out too. I found that the typical span on that is an hour to maybe 90 minutes. People usually tend to fade right around that 60-minute mark. So if you keep it right around there, it can be really good, and you'll find that you can get that data, most of the data that you need, within that 60 minutes. Maybe you have to have a couple of meetings to gather things, but if you chunk it out, it makes it a lot easier. It makes it a lot easier for them and also for you. And then the last point on gathering primary data is don't force people to analyze the data. So a lot of times they say, it's like, so what do you think your RTO is? Shouldn't we have a tool that that does that? Your calculations, when you're trying to figure out these metrics, a lot of times there's analysis behind that. Gather the data, you do the analysis. Don't force them to do it because you're just going to get guesses at that point. So that leads into the next topic of the webinar, of gathering objective data. And needless to say, I think that you have to base your data on fact. It seems like very, it's common sense to do that. But a lot of times within business continuity, and I've seen this a ton over the years, is that we ask things, and we're asking them to do the analysis. So here's the perfect example of bad data gathering, the RTO asking method. So everybody knows what a recovery time frame objective is. And we ask people, so what do you think that is? And it winds up being this game of name that tune. So here's the problem with that. So let's break that down. There's different impacts used to calculate an RTO. You want to bring it back before you incur an unacceptable level of impact. Well, is that an unacceptable level of financial impact? Is that an unacceptable level of reputational impact? Is that there's many different impacts that you can capture, but you can't calculate that in your head. You should gather that data and have a method for synthesizing that data, those impact responses, and coming up with that RTO. We'll go over that a little later. Respondents aren't using a consistent scale. So a lot of times what I think might be a critical process is not what somebody else thinks. For instance, I've had people within human resources, and they may say, well, we have to train everybody within 4 hours. That's their RTO. And I go, really? During a disaster, we're going to be training people in 4 hours? Maybe we are. Maybe we are. But in a typical business, that's not critical. So we don't want that opinion coming in. We don't want it to be whoever yells loudest is going to get the most aggressive RTO. The results reflect limited data integrity. So when your executives look at it and they say, oh, wow, how did you get this? It's like, oh, I asked everybody. That's going to be challenging to really justify that and really get respect for the data that you're gathering. And then there's a lot of, and the other corollary to that is problem 4, is that there are many regulations, standards, best practices, many of which I've mentioned earlier in the webinar, that say, don't do that. So you have to do it over the course of time. It needs to be objective. It needs to pass muster, especially with those auditors and examiners if you're a regulated organization. So objective data gathering methods, consistent data scales, something that's clear so that we actually know, if we say, well, if you have an extreme financial impact, well, what is that? Is that $50,000 or $5 million? Put down the numbers. Don't ask respondents to perform the calculations in their head. Provide better data integrity, and then it provides executive confidence that your results are useful for them, that you're basing them not on opinion, but of fact and on each of those different objective metrics. So the next part of executing is having that BC metrics tool belt. So there's a couple of different parts to performing that metrics and delivering that to your stakeholders. So there's the data collection part, when you're getting your data, like we just talked about. There's the data analysis part where you take that data and you create something meaningful from that, i.e. the metric. And then there's how you actually give that to people. What's your deliverable? What's your reporting and presentation tool? So a big problem that we used to see was that people would use a combination of a lot of different tools, and you would cobble them together. So you would say, okay, I've got this spreadsheet, and I've got this reporting tool, and I've got this presentation tool, and I'm using SurveyMonkey and everything like that. And it's this wild machine of things that have to work very well together. The problem with that is that it's very manual. It takes a lot of time to set up, and those tools evolve. So the tools will wind up where when things might work together one day, they may not another day. And we've seen that happen time and time again, especially with the data gathering tools. They're being updated, and then you're remapping fields. It can get nuts. So use a single tool rather than a series. There's some software that's based on frameworks. So when you buy a tool or when you use a tool, make sure that it's easy to set up. If you're adding a bunch of fields and you have to add all the analytics and you're coming up with that and you have to come up with reporting, your tool is going to be an inhibitor. Don't wait to get started on delivering your metrics. People are not going to wait for you. So all of this time that's setting these things up and getting it right can be highly problematic. Have your tool be an enabler, not an inhibitor. And then the last thing is use the off-the-shelf BC software. So you want things to have best practices. You want things where the analytics are already built. The fields are already built, but you can add additional ones. And the reporting is also built in too. It's providing you those visualizations. Really important, but it's way beyond pretty pictures. It's also delivering all of those detailed analytics that if your pretty pictures have a good effect, people go, yeah, I'm interested, show me the rest, that you can deliver those detailed metrics behind that. So that's the BC metrics tool belt. When we're delivering on that final part about reporting and presentation, one of the big things, and this is the part where we'll talk about visualizations and dashboards and reports. It's it's interesting. It's great to be able to see those kind of things, but it's almost we forget about that back end data, and we deliver this glut of pretty pictures, and they go, all right, so what? Now I just saw this. And a lot of times you can't, it just comes down to an issue of real estate. I can't fit all of those visuals all on one page. So start with the key metrics and high impact findings from your analysis. Visuals are the start, but that detailed data is where the value is ultimately delivered. 5 slides, maybe with some of those pretty pictures, maybe a little less. Supporting appendices. They're going to want to get into that if you've done your job in those first 5 slides. But watch out here. Presentation pitfalls, narratives. I have seen BIAs that get delivered is these long narratives that talk all about a business process. Well, how have you analyzed that? They're all in these capsules that are delivered. There's no analysis. That's useless. You need to have something that analyzes the data across all of your different, basically your entire enterprise, your entire organization. Narratives don't allow you to do that. Words don't allow you to do that. It's the data. The too many pretty pictures or the massive flowcharts. I have a spaghetti diagram was given here, and they said, gosh, look at everything that we're doing. And I'm like, what is this? And this is just a single process of this night cycle for how they're processing things. There's data stores. They've got business, they've got core business processes on here. They've got the feeds. I mean, it's a mess. And this is not good for executives. Your executive is going to look at this and they're going to laugh. So when you're doing those pretty pictures, make sure that they are uncluttered. Make sure that they're clear on what the value is that they're delivering to. More is not necessarily better. And then lists with no data. So they go, all right, here's everything that we have here. Here's our list of apps. Here's our list of business functions. Here's this. And it's like, okay, and tell me what's the importance. So there's no analytics around some of those lists. It's just, all right, well, here's what I need. Why do you need that? Show me, justify it with that data. So lists that are missing the back end critical data. All right, so the next thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to show you a case study. And what the case study is it's a conglomeration of some of the different reports and the way that we've delivered those metrics. And it's across a couple of different industries. So I'm going to show you higher ed. I'm going to show you a bit of healthcare. I'm going to show you a bit of financial services today. So I wanted to be as ubiquitous as possible to deliver as many of those different industries within the case study. So that's why you're going to see a little bit of change in each of those slides with each of the different data gathering and those types. Okay, so what was the first thing that we did? We started by answering these important questions. Remember those questions from before. What data has the most value for your decision makers? So we took this from this is from a financial services client, and they said we've been doing mergers and consolidations, nothing strange in many industries and organizations today. And they said, so now that we're getting all of these things in, we understand overall, the value of these organizations because we acquired them or consolidated them. But I want you to, we want to know what delivers the most value operationally to our organization. So this was actually an initiative that was put out by the CEO and COO of the organization. And they put it out there and they said, okay, we want our different business leaders to solve this. And the business continuity manager said, I think I can solve this. And I'll show you how that happened. So where could we get that data? So the C-level was good with giving overall goals, but it sort of began and ended with that. And they said, go to the overall business leaders for the details on the processes and the execution. And then they also had some secondary financial and operational data. And we asked those executives, how do you want to present it? And they said, short and sweet. Give us a couple of slides. If you make a good point, then we want the rest of it. So that's how they started. So here was the first thing that we received. Oh, excuse me, I'm sorry. What we did was we said, what metrics are we going to deliver? That was the next part of our process. So now that we answered those questions, we said, how are we going to answer those? The first way that we were going to answer those was going to be the business processes that deliver on the same objective. So they had all of these different business processes coming from all these different organizations, and they said, well, how do I, it's like, what are the similarities in between each of these different business units? Because we might be doing the same thing, we just don't know yet. So deliver us a list of all the processes that deliver on the same objective. So in other words, say like, revenue or customer retention, things like that. I'll show you an example in a little bit. Show me that the detailed business processes that deliver the most value and the least value to the organization. Show me the resources that deliver the most and least value, so the apps, the vendors, and the apps, and some of the positions in the company. Any process inefficiencies, that was a little more detailed. thought would be good. And then any resource inefficiencies or single points of failure. So there's 5 things, and you can see we're getting more detailed as we go down towards the bottom of that list. The next thing we said was, okay, now we have what metrics we need. What's the different data to gather? We need organizational mission objectives. Like I said, that was pretty easy to get. We need a list of business processes and activities across the organization. It's great. Key resources and how they're linked to those different business processes was the third item. Our BIA data, so we do BIAs all the time. So that can be used to generate our prioritization metrics. However, our analysis and presentation should be done differently. What does that mean? So we're not going to call it a BIA. We're going to call it something different here because they're not asking about impact. They're asking about value. And I'm going to show you how you can change your BIA around where you can do that. And then process step detail. So what data do we need? We could get that from our different business units, or we can interview people, as we said before. We could also observe. We can do a data capture by observation too. So our delivery steps. Align the processes to the organizational objective. Prioritize business processes by how they provide value to the organization. As I mentioned before, link key resources to the processes. And remember from before, if we're linking those apps and the vendors and the people, and we're saying what value the processes bring to the organization, we can aggregate that up to the application. So in other words, we can say, oh, application ABC supports these 5 business processes. And these 5 business processes provide this value around revenue, reputation, customer retention, so on and so forth. So it provides us the capability to easily, if we can link that up, to very easily from that BIA data, or what I'm about to call it. You can see down on the last bullet what I'm going to call it now, business value analysis data. We can do that. So when we're packaging it, how we package and brand that is really important. I think the term BIA has really gotten a bad rap over the years, although we've actually seen some uptick in that, where people are saying, wow, this really has value. It's an essential part of our digital strategy and of integrated risk management. It's actually, Gartner has actually been writing a lot on that as an essential tool, not just for business continuity, but also for all of risk management. That's a real huge win for the business continuity profession. We're going to call this a business value analysis. So we're kind of doing the same thing, but we're making some adjustments, and I'll show you that on the reports of how I've done that. All right, so now we're going to get into what we gathered, all of the different data, and then we're going to show you some of those reports. So we started with that top-down data gathering. We want to understand what our organizational mission is. That's pretty easy. That's the thing we got from the CEO, and she's been talking about that for years now. And with all the acquisitions, she said, hey, look, this is our direction now. This is what we're doing. We identify the organizational objectives that are supporting that particular mission. So what exactly are we doing overall from a mission perspective, and how are we executing on that? And then what are the processes that are supporting that? So you see, we went top down, started with mission, went to objectives, okay? Then we went to processes, prioritization of processes. So one right under the other. Okay. And then we also got a chart of objectives, okay? So what are the core objectives of our organization? Now let's wait for that to come up on the screen here. There we go. Okay, so we got this chart too from her. We have our minimally acceptable, and then we have our maximum value creation. Here's what we minimally have to do, but we don't want to be in the red area. We want to be in the nice blue area here. Maintain membership. So now I'm in healthcare. Maintain membership. Now I don't want to just maintain it. How are we going to get new customers? Continue servicing our members and paying our providers? No, we want value-added products and services. Ensure our members have access to care. So we always have, and everybody has heard this now from our health insurers, manage care for better delivery outcomes. How can we do that? Provide our current solutions. We're doing pretty well right now, right? Pretty homogeneous within the healthcare industry. No, we want to empower our employees to deliver those innovative solutions. What are the business processes that are supporting that? Where do those lie within these different organizations? So we started, and remember before we said we want to group some of our functions. So what we did was we did a chart where we started grouping some of those functions. And I've got one big chart on here right now. So this one was pretty straightforward. So remember, we said we want to maintain and acquire new customers. Here's a nice report. And I want to have this for all the key areas. You might have about a dozen of these. So it's really easy to present that. Maybe you group those 12 on a page, up to you. Customer support, sales support, vendor support, partner support. I called them all support. But the thing is that we're all doing the same thing. They all help us acquire new customers. Our, customer support going in. The way that I deliver my customer support over the phone was found to, the people that are on those calls are saying to people, gosh, I had a great experience or I had an awful experience. So they're going to utilize that. The sales support, that's self-explanatory on there. Our vendor support, our vendors are out there, they're providing the quality of some of those services too. And then our partner support, the people that are also in our value chains and in our supply chain. So they're helping us too. They're different constituencies, and it's interesting because you notice each of those four were actually in different parts of our organization. They all work for different people. They were all under different cost codes. They were all under different segments, but we bring them all together because they're all going towards the same goal. It's a very easy thing to spot when we're gathering some of our data. So it was a great way to say, hey, maybe these people should be getting together to help us initiate on this, to help us execute on this goal. Sometimes we'll find that people build their programs and their plans around this too. So as opposed to having a plan for sales support or customer support, they have a plan for how they maintain and acquire new customers, both normally and during that recovery situation. Okay. So the next thing is, I promised I wouldn't talk a lot about the BIA. We have a ton of different presentations just on this, but I just wanted to show you just for illustration what we're doing here. All right, looks like our delay is a little longer here. There we go. Okay. So here's what we did. In a BIA, we're essentially looking at our different impact factors, qualitative or quantitative. Those are right here on our y-axis, up to down. And then horizontally, we have each of our different time frames, and we have the different levels of impact on here. All right. So there's different ranges, a chart of ratings where they're rating impact over those time frames. So this is a BIA, the way they say to do it, manage, rate impact over time. So this is good for capturing things like an RTO, right? However, if we want to provide total value, we don't care about time frames. What we care about is what's the total value delivered for that process. There's a lot of different ways to do this. You can do a cost benefit analysis. You can do a lot of these different financial studies. But I'm going to take, for my study, I'm going to use my BIA results, and I'm going to call it total value. So I'm going to call it a BVA, or a business value analysis. So here's the way that I did this. Let me just advance that. There we go. Okay. So here's the comparison here. What I did was I have weightings for how important each of those different items are. Okay. And what I'm doing is to say that I rate something a 2 for revenue and it has a weight of 9, that would equal 18. I'm going to add all those impacts up together. For BIA, I'm going to have a maximum level of risk. When it exceeds that, that's unacceptable. Last acceptable RTO. Pretty basic BCP 101. But for my value metric, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add these all up. And that score is going to be what value it brings to the organization. All right? So notice, the next question you're going to be like, all right, I'm looking at points here. What are the dollars? What are the other value things? How is it helping me reputationally? How is it helping me acquire customers? That's where you've gotten their attention with this, and then you go into the different detail. And that's what I'm going to do right now. I'm going to show you some examples of those different data reports that we have on the back end. And to do that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into some Excel spreadsheet. So whether it's a visualization or not, I just put it on a couple of tabs of a spreadsheet. Easy to send over. So let me just switch here over to my Excel. There we go. Okay. So let's wait for that to appear on the screen here. So the first thing that I did, and I'm switching again, I apologize, I'm switching again into a different industry. I want to see if I can hit all of those here. So I wanted to capture the top business processes for our organization. There we go. Okay, so I switched into higher ed. All right. What I've done is I've added up each of those different points on here. So I've generated this out of my software tool, and what I've done is I've captured the top 20 of them on here. So we can see like the classes, the delivery, all of those different items on here. And then they say, I want to get down into more detail on this. Show me this academic instruction. When I click on this, what it does is it takes me into my different charts. Let's wait for that to come up on the screen here. What that chart is going to show is it's going to show those total points. And then what it's also going to show too is it's going to show each of the different items around the different revenue, the reputational innovative solutions, compliance, see my better delivery outcomes, my customer retention acquisition, my products and services. We can get in here and they can see those relative points, or they can get into that more detailed analysis. A lot of times what we want to do is we just don't want to have that first meeting with those particular stakeholders. We want to have that second meeting and they go, oh, I want to know about this. What are the dollars around this? What are those processes? And we can get into more detail with those to really show that. I'm not showing that here. I'm just showing that initial presentation. But this is exactly the same thing that I've done for my BIA. I've just said, instead of revenue lost, I've just said revenue. Instead of reputation, I've said innovative, so I have a reputation for innovative solutions. See here? So it's these different items, better delivery outcomes, customer retention acquisition. It's not a negative, it's a positive in my business value analysis. Some of the other things that I have, and I'm not going to show you all of these tabs. I've got about 25 in here of some examples that I've done, but I'll just show you a couple more. One of the other things that can be really helpful too is in more detailed delivery is showing them a business process mapping. So, and maybe some points of failure in there. So if we bring that up, we can see here I've mapped out an 8-step process. This is for taking a credit card payment. So we're going back into banking here. And we said, what is the process? What supports that process? And what are privacy risk or those different points of failure on here? So we can see, where are we losing value? Where do we have risk? Where are we delivering? All of that, all of that value. And then we can summarize these things, as I mentioned before, by like those applications, by those people, by those data records. There's infinite possibilities of delivering this. So it's just coming up with the ones that are most salient to your different executives. We can look at functions by value. Here's another neat chart that I did. This was around, I did a heat map around where most of our problems come in, and we can even, like I mentioned before, we can even switch this to the value analysis. So we can see in here, I put the different risks across the top, or you could put the value where it's derived up here. And then you can see here where we're having where we could have the most problems. We can see by process itself, or we can see by that particular value or that impact up here too. So it's another nice way to see things. Application value analysis is another example on here. So here's where I've summarized each of those different items. I can actually do a support component usage risk exposure. So if they say, oh, I wonder where this image works, where the risk is on that, I can go and I can say, all right, well, here this is right here. This is everywhere where that particular item is used. So I can say, look, it's supporting 16 different business functions across here. Here, I even did data privacy risks too. So you can see lots of different ways to present that particular data. And as I mentioned before, deliver those overall, the nice pictures, and then you can get that data. And that data that you're delivering to them can be delivered in multiple meetings with them. If they're scheduling another meeting, they're still interested, and that's what you want to get to. You'll notice that there's a lot of other things to the right here. I'm just going to stick with what I've shown you today. I know it's been kind of fast and there's been a lot of examples. But what I'd like to do now, I'd like to leave 5 minutes. There we go. 5 minutes left. I'd like to leave 5 minutes for questions, and I believe there's a questions panel here to be able to, let's see if we can answer some of these on here. Okay. All right, let me just read through all these. Okay. All right. So what data analysis tools exist? So there's there's obviously the commercial software tools, like Resilience One and, and from our company and other tools too. It's interesting, sometimes people won't have the budget to get a tool. They'll use Excel. And it's actually, it's interesting. I've seen people be, I think in smaller programs be successful with that, where they can deliver some of those metrics, and also they can do some of the trending too on there. It's kind of neat where you get to see some of the dots move on the screen. So that's pretty salient when you're showing your different executives. So I think that could be a very important tool to use on there, and has been successful. Other than that, I mean, there's definitely, as I mentioned before, you usually want to go with, a single tool, but sometimes you see people will go with some of the different reporting tools too, and there's definitely a number of those out there that'll integrate with, with Excel and with your other data gathering tools too. Okay. Please provide more details on the upcoming BC Metrics Guide. Okay, so I just put that up on the screen. So the BC Metrics Guide that we're coming out with is going to summarize all of the different things that I talked about today. And also too, Bob is nice enough to post the presentation out onto the DRJ's website, where you can download that. You can get that, but it's really to review, all the different concepts from today, and also to provide some examples too. So that should be really helpful. That should be out within the next 2 weeks, and that'll be posted up to, I've got a whole bunch of social media and websites here. Here we go, strategicbcp.com. So it should go on that, and you can also request that too from contact@strategicbcp.com. And also too, as a complement to that metrics guide, I believe we have 14 webinars and probably about a dozen white papers up on strategicbcp.com about topics like this. So about, if you're looking to connect better with your executives, if you're looking to do that BIA or the business process mapping, there's entire webinars just on that, and also around vendor risk assessment. So there's lots of really good resources on that. Let's see. Do I recommend maturity indices or a risk management index? Yeah, it could be, maturity indices are really good to show progress of a program. So a lot of times, one of the biggest things that I see that's really pretty neat is that they'll show an ability to recover that improves year over year. So in other words, say you have 100 business processes that you do in your organization. Well, year one, I can recover 20 of those. Then I can recover 40, 60, 80. And then here's all the systems that support that. So it's showing that you're making progress. Validating vendors, how many have we done in a year? That might be a new process that you're doing. So you can put metrics around that too. Yeah, maturity shows progress. And then maturity initially shows that you're goal setting for your particular program. There's nothing better professionally than showing that you've made progress. And then you're also justifying the budget. You say, hey, look, I can't do all of this stuff unless I have a tool or I get those mitigation investments. So that's a really important point to make too. So yeah, I would definitely recommend that.
All right. Well, Frank, we are about the top of the hour here, and if we didn't get to your question, we have several questions that came in through the presentation. So Frank and the Strategic BCP team will have access to these questions, and we'll follow up with everyone after the webinar has ended. So, any parting words here today, Frank?
Well, thanks for your time today. I appreciate you spending an hour of your afternoon with me, and yeah, I hope everybody has a great day. If you need to reach out to me, I'm on LinkedIn under my name, or you can reach out at the company page too. So thanks everybody again.
All right, thanks, Frank. Thanks again, everyone, for their attendance here today. We again hope you gather some great information from today's webinar. DRJ would also like to thank Frank for his time here today, as well as Strategic BCP for sponsoring today's webinar. We will be emailing everyone a link to the recording. You may view this recording as frequently as you wish or share it with your peers. If you do have any additional questions, please contact Disaster Recovery Journal. Thanks again, and this now ends today's webinar.